All right. Hello, everybody. I am not David Bailey. My name is Amanda Fabiano, and I am filling in for David. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin mining and the political landscape there. Obviously, big day, big year for politics generally, and miners have started to look and have had to look for a while on why politics are important to them, both from a regional perspective, from an overall perspective, from a DC perspective. And so to start, let's talk about background to get everyone grounded, right? Give us a little bit of background, where you work, what you do at that company.
Sure. And thank you for joining us, everybody. It's tough to counter-program Sailor, I think, but we will keep it light and lively. I'm Brian Morgenstern, head of public policy for Riot Platforms. So I lead our advocacy efforts at the federal and state level before Congress, the state legislatures, the regulatory bodies that we deal with, and I oversee our work with trade associations like the Texas Blockchain Council, the Digital Chamber, among other groups, and we just launched the Bitcoin Voter Project to make sure that Bitcoiners are engaged in the process. In my past life, I worked actually for President Trump in the White House and the Treasury Department, and worked on Capitol Hill earlier in my career, but now just full speed ahead for Bitcoin.
So, Jayson Browder, I'm the head of government affairs for Marathon Digital Holdings, largest publicly traded Bitcoin miner. Operate on 4 different continents. So I do very similar things to Brian. We also are focused internationally, and so we are the first publicly traded company that we know of that has partnered directly with foreign governments. The first was in the UAE, where we partnered with the Sovereign Wealth Fund ADQ, and most recently we signed an MOU with the Kenyan government. And something I think that's very near and dear to us is our partnership with Riot and CleanSpark for the Bitcoin Voter Project. The first of its kind, as Brian mentioned, 501c4 that is focused specifically on Bitcoiners, Bitcoin miners, engaging voters to make sure that they turn out. And we also have a PAC as well, which will be spending money on political campaigns in the future for Bitcoin supportive candidates.
My name is Justin Nolan. I am the CEO of Arkon Energy. We are a private miner with sites in Ohio and Texas. And I've been mining Bitcoin, or involved with mining Bitcoin, for 5 years now, since 2019, when I first got started building out the Helio project.
And Justin, let's start with the Helios project. So obviously we both have a little bit of history there, right? And you really started that project with local government, right? We've seen a lot over the past, 3 or 4 months be a top-down approach, but there's been a lot of bottom-up approach that started, right? Grassroots approaches with relationships with political groups, right? So let's talk a little bit about how you got Helios started from a political lens.
So one of the first things I did after I had purchased land in Dickens County, Texas, was to reach out to the local judge, explain what I was trying to do, and ask for his assistance. I didn't really know, I didn't have a specific ask, but just in general. I wanted to make him familiar with it. And I got complete buy-in. Judge Brendel was enormously helpful towards getting everything set for us to eventually sell to Argo and immediately begin construction. And I think it's really important, there's a lot of negative about Bitcoin mining, but the bonuses, or what we've done for Dickens County, Helios, which Amanda actually bought from Argo, or Galaxy.
Fair price.
They are the largest taxpayer in the county. They're the largest employer. The average salary for those jobs is twice what the average salary is for all the other jobs in the county. And they've raised such an enormous amount of tax revenue that they actually lowered property taxes by 20% in that county. So the judge and I speak regularly, and he's a big fan of what's going on.
And that's a local level, but when you have been building out sites or been you guys have had sites for a while. There's been some constraints from like a state level, right? And from also a DC level. What are some of the efforts that your teams have put in place behind the scenes that people really wouldn't know about?
I think one thing that you've hit on is the engagement piece, which I think is so important. We also have a judge, Judge Mazingill, in Hood County. We also fund the property taxes alone for our site in Granbury, fund all essential services of Hood County. And so what I think it's important is, to your point, which is this is not only top down but bottom up, and really focus at, and I know Brian can speak a lot about this too, because we're working hand in hand for a lot of the issues that are happening, not just at the local level, but at the state level, but the county commissioners, the constable, and then of course state and house reps, as well as we try to share the gospel of what we're doing to benefit not only these local communities, but the grid as well in the places we operate.
Yeah, it's critically important. There's a lot of the state elected officials who don't really understand Bitcoin mining yet. They don't appreciate the value that flexible loads add to the grid. And there are a lot of legacy industry and players in the communities that have been there for generations and have been shoveling millions of dollars in donations and campaign donations and otherwise, at these politicians and in these communities. So we're the new kid in town. So we really have to wear out the leather on our shoes and educate these folks on what we're doing. We are also, among maybe the biggest employer in Milam County, biggest taxpayer in the school district. We have all these stories to tell that are very common. Rural communities that were hurt by offshoring or just changes in the economy. The old Alcoa smelting plant in Rockdale went out of business. That was hundreds of jobs in a community of only 5,000 people. So now Riot comes in and basically brings those jobs back and the tax revenue back. So the local officials really appreciate what we're doing, and then helping to make sure that bubbles up to the state reps in the governor's office and lieutenant governor's office so that they understand that we're revitalizing rural communities and we are not strains on the grid. We are stabilizing on the grid. But it can be an uphill battle, like I said, when you're the new kid in town. And if the state has had uncertainty about the grid, sometimes maybe a cynical way out is kind of try to find a scapegoat and figure out what changed. Well, we didn't used to have Bitcoin miners, so it must be their fault. Not true, but it takes time and effort to build those relationships. It's really about relationship building, and there's no substitute for it. You have to just be in front of them, building a relationship of trust, and that's really the only way to ensure a brighter future for the industry.
And if I could just make a real quick pitch, Amanda, which is how important government affairs and policy is. I think for a long time, coming from sort of a libertarian sort of founding of Bitcoin and it being decentralized and stuff, it's been taken for granted. And we've seen over the last, obviously, months, but in the last 12 months or more, how important it is to have the right people and invest in the right people in the space, that we can engage with these people, whether it's on the local level, state level, and now big time, right?
Yeah, and I think the really interesting thing is that the reason why public policy is super important is because you have actual businesses with actual people, with actual sites, right? And so you start to think about it differently. You start to think about, hey, we actually need them to not shut us down, because if we get shut down, 300 people don't have a job anymore, right? So I think it switches a little bit, right? And so to think that we, Bitcoin doesn't need anyone, right? Like, it will go on forever, but to build a Bitcoin business in the U.S., you need to have the proper setup and you need to have support. And so obviously we did this, bottom-up approach, and it seems like we've now also started to do a top-down approach. All of you and me. We were all at Mar-a-Lago about a couple months ago. We had a conversation with President Trump, and he's obviously coming tomorrow too. So, thoughts from that, as much as you can share. What were your general takeaways from that, and why do you think that this approach is important as we go forward?
Well, I know some people were, Brian came from the Trump administration, so he's been engaged for quite some time. I had some very close friends and former colleagues who, from the national security space, that had, briefed President Trump and always said how sharp he was, right? I think he gets a bad rep from the traditional media of sort of being all over the place. And so, I was quite excited for myself, not just for Marathon being represented as, an integral part of the industry to be present, but to see how much President Trump knew about the industry, knew about energy, knew about our technology, and I was quite blown away. You can tell that he has a really solid team around him. He is taking what we do as an industry serious. And also, I just want to highlight, and we might talk about this, is he understood how we have been targeted unfairly. And, Brian can speak about the EIA survey that came out from the Department of Energy that Riot. I'm not going to steal your thunder there because it's quite an accomplishment for our industry. And then also President Biden's excess tax, 30% on energy uses of Bitcoin miners. We didn't even need to bring this up to him. He actually called it out in the meeting, which was quite impressive.
Well, and the bank regulators and Operation Choke Point, he was very familiar with that. The energy piece, bootstrapping to facilitate energy development. One of the first things he said, he talked about was that kind of choke point issue and the industry and Bitcoiners facing unfair discrimination. And I think that had come into focus for him in recent years and months because of like the Canadian trucker situation when they were protesting and they had their accounts frozen. There was an event that Don Jr., his son, was supposed to lead, and like the ticket selling mechanism was taken down, which seemed like obvious political discrimination. So that actually was a piece of it that I think was very enlightening to him. And then as a developer, the energy piece was really interesting. But we had sent a lot of information down on polling data on the politics of it, that this is a really energized group of voters who are all across the spectrum, but who care about this issue. It could be a game changer. The last election was like 80,000 votes across 4 states, and there are millions of Bitcoiners out there who are awakening, and they see the hostility that's been coming from the administration. So they saw this as a political opportunity, but it's also the marriage of good politics and good policy that we're seeing coming out of the Trump camp, which is really promising. Now the ball's in the Democrats' court. Hopefully they'll improve.
I was amazed at how informed he was about AI and the need for development of all of our electrical grid generation, and how Bitcoin mining could act as a tip of the spear. We can sop up electricity now and make it available later as residents or AI come into play, which, I mean, it's not something that I expected him to be so clued in on, but he was right there.
I think it was really interesting that he was willing and able to have a conversation with us on it. I think that was the most encouraging part of the whole discussion. When we think about Bitcoin, it really should be a bipartisan issue. How are you guys thinking about it? Because it hasn't been, right, over the past 4 years. So just thoughts on that.
Well, Bitcoin voters are, it's more of a generational issue than it is a political one. And I think, Jayson was saying that our hope is that this is the last election where you can get away with being hostile.
It's going to be
Bitcoin.
the last one.
Our hope is that over the next few years, we'll get to a point where we're choosing between pro-Bitcoin candidates, and it's not one or the other. In this election, I mean, the agenda of the administration has been just so overtly hostile, trying to close our bank accounts, trying to take away our power supply, trying to take away self-custody, trying to implement a CBDC. I mean, they've been like the campaign ads write themselves. I mean, it's wrong. And then, kind of Trump's evolution on this over the past few years happened very quickly. We're glad to see it, and we're hopeful that that then puts pressure on the other side of the aisle to kind of see the light and see that these voters aren't going away. And there's no need for Bitcoiners to be captured by one political party. Bitcoin doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. So we're going through the process, but I think the future is bright, and we're getting there.
And I think there's like parallels to the internet, where the internet was not a red thing or a blue thing. It was an American thing, and it was supported by bipartisan, and amazing American companies have come out of that. The Googles, the Facebooks, the Salesforce, the Amazons, etc. And we don't want it where 1 year we do really, really well, and the next year we do really, really bad. What I would point to is the legislative branch, which we have seen with SAB 121 that was passed bipartisan. You had the former Speaker of the House, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, that voted for this. You had Chuck Schumer, the majority leader. You have the market structure bill, which is the most comprehensive digital asset legislation that has been introduced. 70-plus Democrats voted for that. There's now a companion bill in the U.S. Senate with Senator Stabenow, who is expected markup in August. And so you have, representatives like Ro Khanna, who's actually here and speaking at the conference. You have Richie Torres from New York. You have Jim Himes, senior Democrat from Connecticut. And so really the hang-up has been this entire time in the executive branch. And we all know why, is because Senator Elizabeth Warren has basically been given de facto queen power to basically put all of her staff and people that are supportive of her agenda in key financial positions, whether it's the SEC or the White House, and has really made it hard for companies in this space to operate.
I think they're called goons. Is that what we call them? Right? Isn't that the word that people are using for Elizabeth Warren's friends that she's put in places?
Oh.
Yeah. Justin, you are building in multiple different states, right? Is that something that you think about from like a top-down approach? Like you have the local level and then the top-down. Like, tell me a little bit of why you guys are going for both and how you do that with Arkon.
We look for states that are Bitcoin mining friendly, or at least open to it. And I think that there are other states, I won't name names, but there are other states that are not friendly and focus on negatives that we don't necessarily see as the same. We don't agree, and they often threaten to shut down sites because of negative environmental impacts or whatever the impacts are that they want. But it becomes a little bit dangerous to move into those states not knowing what's going to happen 3-5 years down the road. So Ohio and Texas are very Bitcoin friendly, very Bitcoin mining friendly. And so that's why so much of the industry has moved there.
So I want to switch gears a little bit because we mentioned this for a second about the Bitcoin Voter Project. I think it's really interesting of a project, and I've found it unbelievably fascinating to learn about. And I think it's really needed right now. So for everyone who has not heard of it, can you give a little brief description on what it is, why you started it, why you think it's important, and what the aim of the project is meant to be?
Sure. The Bitcoin Voter Project exists to educate, galvanize, motivate, activate Bitcoiners in the political process. So our three companies, Riot, Marathon, and CleanSpark, so far are backing it. We are running digital ads. You may have, if you've opened Twitter or Facebook or anything at this conference, you may have seen some of our ads. We want to get everybody signed up on our email list, following our social media accounts, and we will be able to activate those voters when we need them. So in this election in the fall, the presidential race is obviously very important, but there are races all across this country that will have policy implications for Bitcoin. The Senate race in Ohio is obviously very important. The Senate race in Texas is very important. Montana, Nevada, all of these races, Bitcoin and to an extent crypto issues are very relevant. They are a live ball, and they're going to be critically important in this election. Then heading into the future, after post-election, when we are in policy-making mode, there will be robust debates. And we want Bitcoiners to have the resources they need to pick up the phone and call their state rep, call their state senator, call their governor, lieutenant governor, call their congressman, and we want them to have their voice heard. I worked in a congressional office. It was my first job out of college, and on certain tough votes, our boss would come out of his office and say, what are the voters saying? Like, what are our constituents saying? Are we getting calls and letters on this? What are they saying? It works. It helps. And it's going to be critically important to make sure that anti-Bitcoin policies do not win. We can't win if we are not participating. So that's why the Bitcoin Voter Project exists. We encourage you to go to the website, follow us on social media. We are accepting Bitcoin donations if you want to be financially supportive. We'd love that. And we're going to get Bitcoiners to the polls. Like I said, I mean, in the presidential race, it was 4 states. I think it was 4 states and 80,000 voters. There's millions and millions of Bitcoiners out there. We can make a huge difference. The Senate race in Wisconsin last time was like 1% separated the winner from the loser, and it was like all the vape people who really like vaping, and they galvanized in the state of Wisconsin. That's just one example of the type of thing we're trying to do. And immediately after winning, Senator Ron Johnson went and spoke to their group and said, I think I'm here because of you, so thank you. And what do you need? So we want Bitcoiners to have that kind of effect and that kind of influence because it's what we need. There's some very dark forces out there that don't want us to win, but if we work together a little bit, we will.
And a key thing I'd like to add to that, and obviously we are grateful for the partnership with Riot and CleanSpark on this, is we also believe that there are people who are Bitcoiners that don't actually realize they're Bitcoiners, right? There's a huge swath of people that, maybe they have an ETF in their 401k account or their Roth IRA. They're Bitcoiners. They don't want politicians to make their retirement accounts to go down. There are people that care about inclusion, or people that are debanked, or that want to be self-sovereign, that actually have some of the core values that Bitcoiners have. We want it to be as large of a tent as possible. And so, we're making a very concerted effort to identify those individuals. And then, the Senate election is going to be very important this cycle. At the end of the day, we want to nullify Senator Elizabeth Warren. If that means, the president changes, the administration changes, or the Senate changes. Right now, it's a 50-50 split in the U.S. Senate with Vice President Harris, who has the deciding vote, which basically gives the Democrats the gavel, which then enables her to have nominated and confirmed her appointees. And we do not want to have that happen going forward.
Well, anti-Bitcoin appointees for sure. One other analogy with the Bitcoin Voter Project, everybody has heard of a lot of very influential organizations, Emily's List, the NRA, Planned Parenthood. There are countless examples of organizations that represent millions of voters and communicates with them. Environmental groups are very good at this. They can immediately get 7,000 letters and phone calls to a member of Congress within like 24 hours. We're going to do that for Bitcoiners. So join the Bitcoin Voter Project and help us win.
And it does seem like we are winning. I mean, once President Trump came out in favor of Bitcoin mining and pro-crypto, I think the SEC started to relax a little bit. And you saw some changes there in policy and Ethereum's ETF. So it does seem like they're paying attention and that they know maybe they're on the wrong side of this.
So a couple minutes left. I have one last question for you. let's say, we wave a magic wand, and we're able to get all the things done that we want to get done. What does that look like?
Great question. So at the federal level, well, let me distill it that state, local, federal, Bitcoiners, our asks are usually pretty easy to comply with. It's leave us alone. It's if you don't do anything to us, we will love that. Treat us fairly. Just treat us like every other company operating a business, and we'll be okay. At the federal level, that looks like the EIA, when they tried to collect all our energy information with the goal of limiting or eliminating Bitcoin mining. We don't want them doing anything of that sort. Collecting information about what energy needs we have for the future, reasonable. Taking the approach they did, unreasonable. So ending Operation Choke Point with banking regulators will be very critical. None of this digital asset mining excise tax nonsense, which was explicitly for the purpose of getting Bitcoin miners out of America. Basically, stopping the government from discriminating against us will be critically important at the federal level. At the state level, it's sort of similar. You treat us fairly. Let us participate in the power markets the way every other business does. Let us revitalize rural communities. And that's it really is more relationship dependent when you're at that level. At the federal level, it's mostly stopping things, stopping bad things.
Just add, I think Brian hit a lot of the key points. There's legislation that's in both the House and Senate that we'd like to see passed. People ask me about the market structure bill. While it doesn't, directly affect Bitcoin miners specifically, anything that increases the adoption and usage of Bitcoin, which will, in theory, increase the price of Bitcoin, then directly affects our business. And so, that's why we've been supportive of SAB 121. That's why we've been supportive of the market structure bill. We spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill advocating for this, even though in some ways it doesn't directly affect, our mining operations in Texas or elsewhere. There's also Emmer has a bill, a blockchain bill, and then there's one on self-custody that every American should be allowed to have self-custody. We're obviously in support of those, and so I think I think having those bills passed in both the House and Senate and an administration that's not going to veto them will be really great for our industry.
Eliminating cap gains taxes on small transactions to facilitate more adoption. That's another one. This strategic reserve idea.
I was waiting for that to come up. I was
level.
Shocked that the two of you didn't bring that up.
At a macro level, how about sound money? How about you stop printing money and destroying our currency? I think if we could wave a magic wand, that's what we'd want, and that's why Bitcoin exists. So President Trump moving into a Bitcoin strategic reserve would be fantastic. But sound money would be number one.
I think if I had a magic wand, I think there would be a couple things I would want. I would definitely want us to have Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. I think I would also want everyone to understand that Bitcoin mining is good for energy abundance, and we need to have energy abundance to continue to be like a leader or the absolute leader of the world. So, critically important.
In creating sounder money, there's been a pretty robust discussion about. Maybe not, not the gold standard, but having the dollar or at least the U.S. balance sheet with assets like Bitcoin. The U.S. has a lot of assets. They have a strategic oil reserve. They own like 70% of the western United States land. They have all sorts of things on the balance sheet to increase the strength and resilience of the economy. I think Bitcoin would make a ton of sense in strengthening the country's balance sheet and the value of a dollar. So, I'll amend my prior answer of just leave us alone to actually let's go on offense and get some really positive legislation going.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next year, we are bringing the Bitcoin Conference to the American West. Las Vegas. The brightest minds in the world will converge to deliver Bitcoin history. Buy your tickets now at b.tc/conference/2025.